Our first speaker is Sara Dubois, and she is the Chief Science Officer at the British Columbia SPCA. Sara directs province-wide animal welfare science operations, education, and advocacy projects. She has a biology degree in undergraduate, a master's in animal science, and a PhD in animal science. Her research focuses on using social science methodology to develop humane wildlife policy that aligns with societal values. Sara.
Good morning. Let's just get up here. So I come from a wildlife rehabilitation background, and I've worked for the humane movement for almost 15 years now. So like Stephanie, I started when I was 10 years old. I don't have a direct affiliation with any zoos or aquariums, but given the nature of the BCSPCA's role in our community, we do have indirect relationships with the captive wildlife management systems. And particularly, we're the interface of the public. And that was one of the reasons that I went back to do my PhD with David Fraser, to study and understand the values that people hold for wildlife and how these can actually affect policy. Specifically, how do we get more humane policy in our systems? So I thought today I'd give you a bit of a story that's happened lately in our community of Vancouver. But we'll just start with a bit of background about the BCSPCA. So we are one of North America's largest animal welfare organizations of our kind. We have a population of only 4.5 million people in our province, but we're very big. So we are 364,000 square miles, which is just slightly bigger than the states of Washington, Oregon, and California combined, but with sparse people all over that area. We have 42 different locations in our province, mostly companion animal shelters, spay-neuter facilities. We do have a wildlife rehabilitation center as well. We like the number 4 a lot, I guess. So we have 450 employees, over 4,000 volunteers, and we help 42,000 animals a year. We are an evidence-based organization, and our mandate that guides us is the 5 freedoms. And this helps us guide our programs in operations at our facilities, as well as our humane education programs, our scientific programs, as well as our role in advocacy. But we have an unusual position in our organization because we also serve to reflect public values, and we have an enforcement role. So we actually have constables that are sworn in under the Police Act that enforce animal cruelty legislation in our province. We don't have an Animal Welfare Act in Canada. We have a provincial each province has their own animal cruelty legislation that's administered differently and enforced differently. And then there is a federal criminal code for animal cruelty as well. So it is quite a bit different scenario for the management of captive and wild animals, but they do apply, and there is enforcement capabilities under these laws. Our organization was founded in 1895 because of public values. People were concerned about horses, working horses specifically, and they formed our society because of that, the values that they held for treating these animals in a better way. We have a front row seat to witnessing shifting values of the public at our organization. There's always been a really wide range of values for captive wildlife. There are people that, of course, don't support it fundamentally, whether these are wild animals or captive bred. We have people who support temporary captivity, so this is perhaps a rehabilitation program or a breeding facility. Others may support permanent captivity, but with a very specific purpose, and that could be for conservation, research, or a sanctuary situation. And then we have other individuals who support unconditional captivity, and that would include private owners of wildlife and exotic animals and those who use them in entertainment. And we still see this phenomenon. This is the newest popular pet in British Columbia. It's a Patagonian mara. It's a very large rodent species. It's about 25 to 30 pounds, and it's being recently sold at pet stores and bred in BC, unfortunately. So when we look at values that people hold for wildlife, we know that our values are those first order cognitions. They are what we use as kind of the rules for our decision making. And they inform our basic beliefs, what we think we know, and beliefs will inform our attitudes. Attitudes are the positive or negative tendencies that we have towards specific things. As a group, as a social group, we have attitudes that form our norms, and these are often studied in order to relate to what we might do, how we might vote, activities we might participate in with wildlife. And those would be our behavioral intentions. But what we actually do is our behaviors. So social scientists find it the best strategy to try to predict people's values are measuring people's attitudes and potentially their behavioral intentions to understand and how to influence over time, because values are slow to change. We know that people's attitudes can change, beliefs can change with more information, new science, but values are much harder to change because they're such a fundamental core. The values that people hold for wildlife can be quite varied. They can be recreational, aesthetic, educational, biological, social, spiritual, cultural, or commercial. Values are not right or wrong. They can differ and they can be opposed. Again, informing beliefs and attitudes is how we really shape values over time. But as even Andrew said, laws and policies can be really slow to change to, as well as behaviors sometimes can even be changed to slow to reflect new information and changing attitudes. These are all currently animals in British Columbia that are being bred and sold and kept as pets. Only one has recently been restricted, and that's now albino python. But otherwise, as an enforcement agency, this is a very big challenge for us. We are a humane society that runs shelters for cats and dogs. When these animals are found, like this sulcata, it was found as a stray animal on a mountain walking trail. So someone actually, literally dumped it. We have a kangaroo but breeding facility that adopts these animals out for hobbyist pets. When these animals are no longer wanted by their owners, where are they going? And so this is our ongoing challenge as a humane society, how we get involved in these things and where we're looking to zoos and aquariums for partnerships. Our society's stance are reflected in our public position statements. So these are all online. You can find them about where we are and what we stand on, how we stand on an issue. And these are developed through our Animal Welfare Committee. So it's based on animal welfare science, what the purpose of that activity, the broad values of our membership, as well as informed by our experience in cruelty investigations. And I'm going to admit, we don't often get invited to a good zoo to say, hey, come check out our awesome facilities. We get asked to attend the facilities that we need to inspect and to investigate. So we have a little bit of a biased view of a lot of people who are keeping exotic animals because we only come in when the worst is happening. We're not opposed to hunting. I thought I'd give a few examples of our position statements here, but we are opposed to the trophy hunt. It is a legal activity. Grizzly bears in British Columbia are hunted for trophy hunting still, unfortunately, but we expect it to be conducted in a professional and a humane manner. We're not opposed to farming per se, but we are opposed to fur farming. It is, again, a legal activity conducted in British Columbia, but we expected them to be held to a code of practice. And codes of practice in Canada are developed at a national level with industry as well as humane society representation, academics and scientists that are relevant to that field. We're not opposed to keeping wildlife for exotic animals in captivity if the 5 freedoms for those animals can be met, and that this is for an appropriate purpose. So we have specific statements on exotic animals as pets, marine mammals, which includes whale watching and those types of activities, as well as zoos, aquariums, and other animals in permanent captivity, which would include wildlife rehabilitation, because some rehab centers actually do keep permanently some patients. So the Canadian Association of Zoos and Aquariums has 32 members in Canada. So remember, we're only about 1/10 of the population of the US. This includes 6 marine aquariums and marine centers. Now, we do not have the same infrastructure like your USDA permits. We have no federal regulation of these facilities. There's CASA accreditation, but there's probably over 200 facilities, private individuals that are keeping exotic animals, at least in Canada, but we actually have no documentation of them unless the province requires that they register these animals, because that USDA system is not existent. The only aquariums in Canada that keep cetaceans are Marineland and Vancouver Aquarium. And if you've been to either of these, they are very, very different organizations. But both have something in common, and they've been met with considerable opposition to keeping cetaceans in captivity from the public recently. So codes and practice in Canada, as I mentioned, for farm animals are developed at this national level with a lot of collaboration and transparency and input. But zoo and aquarium accreditation standards in Canada are not developed with the same process, but neither are those for pest control. So I thought today, because some of you have heard about some of the interactions on the Vancouver Aquarium, I would run through very quickly to fill in some of the blanks to the stories with some of the media headlines. So in 1956, the first captive killer whale came to the Vancouver Aquarium. It's a nonprofit organization that has both federal and provincial government fundings contributing to its expansion. It leases land from the city of Vancouver, but this means that its landlord, the Park Board, actually requires it to pay a sum for its lease every year. It is about a $30 million institution and actually has a wildlife rehabilitation program. In 1996, the Park Board bylaw changed to prohibit capture from the wild. This met with a lot of controversy back in 1996. The last killer whale was transferred out of the aquarium in 2001 to SeaWorld. The Vancouver Aquarium currently owns 9 belugas, 2 Pacific white-sided dolphins, porpoises, etc. 2 of those belugas are on site, and 7 of them are off at other locations, 5 at SeaWorld facilities and 2 at the Georgia Aquarium. So this is a quick cautionary tale of why not to ignore public values, because we really feel that institutions, any facility that's keeping wild animals really requires a social license to operate. You can have great facilities, expert staff, active research program and conservation goals, but your credibility, transparency, and how you respond to your critics are really key. So the critics started stirring up some concern about the expansion of the Vancouver Aquarium's new facilities this year, and that might actually translate into more animals being in captivity. There was petitions sent out. And this happened to be an election year. So ongoing debate ensued, and the mayor was asked, personally, what are your thoughts on keeping cetaceans? And he said, this is my personal feeling, not my party's, but I support a phase out. So this really ignited the fire of this debate. And other councillors quickly jumped on board asking for a referendum. The referendum idea was rejected because it's really hard to really make these decisions, and I'm really glad that it didn't move forward. But other stories started coming out of the woodwork. Other editorials started focusing on this issue more and more on the front page of the newspaper. This became an issue that everybody was talking about in Vancouver. Park Board Vice Chair decided that this was something, an activity, something she was going to take on, and she said that we're actually going to look at addressing bylaw changes, again, like we did in 1996, instead of a full-out referendum on this issue. And they actually engaged Dr. John Gaidos from California to look into this issue and actually kind of do an overall assessment of the Vancouver Aquarium, which is a really great idea. But this was a game changer. And of course, the critics on all sides of the issue came out to discuss this issue. There was a real scramble in the summer as to, what does this mean? What is cetaceans? If we lose cetaceans at the aquarium captivity, what does this mean for future research and for other programs at the organization? And of course, the protest continues, and people who are not your typical protesters were out there. There was a lot, the protests grew stronger and stronger, and the momentum on this issue was quite significant. So a lot of people started asking, well, what it would look like, the Vancouver Aquarium, without cetaceans. And polls were done of British Columbia residents. This continued for most of the summer. And finally, John Gaidos' report came out, and some really interesting recommendations. If you want a copy of this report, I'm happy to give it to you, or you can find it online. It really it made some suggestions as to looking at doing welfare studies, specifically of the cetaceans in captivity, because those hadn't been done yet, and looking at an oversight committee. So this all led up to the big event, which was a Saturday meeting. If you've ever been to an open house to debate a political issue, you can imagine what debating this issue would be like. So they invited community members to sign up to participate in this debate at a park board meeting. A lot of people did show up, and the report was presented, and all sides of the issue were really addressed. But politics are an interesting world, because before the meeting even happened, the nominations for the next council were due. And so some new faces were all of a sudden at the election ballot for November's ballot. And there was a decision. The park board did come to a conclusion that they weren't going to recommend a phase out, they weren't going to prohibit the aquarium from obtaining new animals from other institutions, but they did suggest a breeding ban and also an oversight committee. Other stories started to come out. When people started to investigate the John Geddes report, we didn't really know about some of the SeaWorld connections, so other investigative journalists started really digging into these things. And of course, no story would be incomplete without a legal action as part of the scenario. So this is still in front of the courts. So in November, we actually just recently had our municipal elections for a new mayor, council, and park board. All sides of the issue were out stumping for different parties, of course, and what this would mean. There's, of course, many, many other issues, important issues for council to be addressing, but this really caught the attention, of course, of the media. And on November 16th, a new park board was elected with a majority of NPA, and they said within 24 hours that they would be reversing any bans at the facility. So, as a lesson learned, I don't think anyone enjoyed this process, or this was the most effective process to develop policy for advance animal welfare. I do think there's incredible value in listening to critics and to doing lots of public survey work. In this case, it was really reasonable to expect that all animals at the facility were going to stay there, and that perhaps some work should be done in the future to study their welfare. We really support the rehabilitation programs, but the center itself actually says it funds itself independently, and they struggle with some funding. There were still unanswered questions about a justification for breeding or obtaining new animals in the future. The relationship with SeaWorld and the transfer of the seals to Marineland were things that the public generally didn't know about, and we're quite shocked. So again, I think really this social license includes the credibility, the transparency, and how you respond to your critics. I think we need to just look at the codes of practice development process and how we did that for other farm animals to seek broader input on accreditation standards. I think the idea of an oversight committee is quite excellent, of independent experts. But this is one thing I'm just going to leave you with, because I have questions about this, because I understand that there is a threat potentially of, this is one of the reasons the aquarium gave for not having this type of committee, because their accreditation could be removed if they in fact had external input on their operations. I understand this may have happened in Toronto and they lost their accreditation. Vancouver did not lose their accreditation in 1996 when there was some changes by the park board, so I'm kind of unsure as to where we're at with this, so I'd love to talk about that in the future. Thank you very much.